Hey everyone, Steve here, and today we're going to be learning how to make sweet trick shots just like Dude Perfect. So, hope you guys are excited. Whoa, let's go! Oh, and by the way, it's only going to be one take because we're going to be using some CGI visual effects. That's right guys, we're going to be learning how to make trick shots a lot easier than actually doing them yourself. So I'm going to start off the video by giving you guys a few tips and tricks on how to film footage for visual effects like this, and then I'm going to be using Blender to add some CGI visual effects elements to your footage. Now some of you guys might be going, oh but Steve, all these effects can be done easier with After Effects, and no, we're going to be doing it completely free, and using Blender will give us even more control to do some more advanced things if you wanted to. So, before we go becoming internet celebrities with our trick shots, I'd like to first thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare offers over 25,000 premium courses on how to learn so many different skills, always taught by professionals. For example, you can learn how to film great looking footage for things like trick shots on YouTube. They're super affordable with an annual subscription costing less than $10 a month, so why not give them a shot? And if you use the link in the description below, you can get 2 free months of Skillshare Premium, so you're welcome. So as you saw, I did a few different types of trick shots for this video. The one we're going to be doing is the last one here, the easiest one, so I wanted to save this one for the tutorial. I initially was going to have the drone shot be the one I used in this tutorial, but due to the drone moving around in the air a little bit, it made it a little bit more difficult to integrate our 3D graphics into it, so I'm using this shot, which will be much easier. And then if you're wondering how I did that shot where I hit the bystander in the head, that was done basically with a few jump cuts. We used a matte, and then we switched to a shot of the subject already on the ground. And then for the ball elements, that was done with some rigid body physics right inside Blender. So first off, when you're shooting footage for trick shots, you're going to want to lock your camera off on a tripod and set all of these settings to manual, so you don't have the auto exposure and white balance changing the look of your footage. So once your camera's in place, you're going to want to start off by filming just a nice, super easy close shot of you hitting the basket with the ball.
One hour later.
Alright, fine. I'm not the greatest at shooting hoops. Whatever. Shut up. So now that you have the shot of the ball going through the basket, you're going to immediately want to run the distance for a long shot without moving the camera or settings and whip a shot in the general direction of your target. This gives us a shot you need of the subject launching the ball, as well as some good reference on what the ball should look like in the lighting, and also gives you some reference for animation when it comes to adding the CGI ball elements. It's also really beneficial if you're shooting on a cloudy or sunny day. If you're stuck in the in-between stage of clouds and sun, it can be really difficult to make your shots match up when you add them together. Next, you're going to want to take a quick picture of your basketball in the shade so there's no lighting changes on the ball. This will be used as a texture for our CG element. And then lastly, I also shot a 360 environment photo of the location I was filming at. This is also used to kind of match lighting in 3D. If you don't have an Insta360 camera like I used to shoot this environment, you can do it with a phone using the video I made somewhere on the screen. So now that we have all of our footage and elements shot, we're ready to head over to the computer and start adding in the magic. So like I said, we're using Blender 2.8, just recently released. You guys can go ahead and download it. There might be a link in the description for you guys, otherwise blender.org. And first off, we're going to have to combine our 2 shots. And this is going to be really easy to do in basically any sort of video editing software, but it can also be done in Blender. You're just going to go to the compositor and add in both your clips, the shot where it hits the hoop and the shot where you throw the ball. And then you just want to line up these 2 shots in the compositor using the hoop shot on the left side and the throwing shot on the right side. You just want to line them up with the timing as well. So when the ball hits the concrete, that's when you want the ball to be hitting the hoop over on the right side. Then you can combine them together with a simple mask just by going Shift A and adding in a matte box mask. You just want to adjust the X and Y settings here until you have your box over your hoop. And then with this simple box mask, all you need to do is use a color, mix, drop that in right there, dropping your hoop in the bottom socket and your throw in the top socket, using the mask as the factor. And then you can see right here, we have the ball already in the hoop, ready to go through. Here I've already edited the clips to match in length, so the ball falls through the hoop here at the right time with my other video. Just as this ball is coming down towards the ground, that's when I have the hoop start to animate there and the ball falls through the hoop. That's exactly what you want, and if you want to do this with your own footage, all you have to do is trim the videos so the lengths are the same, with the hoop shot falling at the same time that the ball is hitting the ground. I'm going to include this shot already split screen together, as it's pretty easy to do and I want to be able to share it in one single file. So you can download that with the link in the description below, as well as the other assets that you'll need to do this visual effects shot. And we're ready to start adding in our CGI elements. So I'm just going to start a new file here. So with a new scene here, I'm just going to grab our camera, go over to our camera settings along the right here, and enable background images. Here I'm going to add in that clip that I have with the two shots split screen together. You're going to change it from image to movie clip, and then just open up that shot. Now if I hit 0 to go into my camera view, we can see that we have the video playing in the background here. So now that we have our footage imported in the background here, I'm going to change a few of our scene settings to match the footage settings. So I know that this is shot at 28 millimeters. If you're not sure what your camera focal length is, if you're using a DSLR, it will tell you on the lens. Otherwise, you can Google it to find out what the focal length of your camera is, maybe on your phone or something. This one is 28 millimeters, so go ahead and change it to 28 if you're using this footage. Then we're going to go over to the output settings here and make sure it's set to 1080p because that's the size of our footage, and then just change the frame rate to 2997 as that is the FPS we shot at. So I'm going to hit number pad 1 on my keyboard and then Alt Control 0 to snap my camera to the side view. Here if I grab my camera now by hitting G, you can see that we have the grid floor already in a better position. And I just want to line it up so the X and Y lines here, the red and green markers, are lined up along our concrete pad here. So I'm going to double tap R and rotate this around until our X axis is right along the edge of our concrete pad here. And then I'm just going to hit G to continue moving it, and then double tapping R to move the rotation. Here if I hit Z and wireframe, you can see that we're lining it up pretty well. I just want this to be running along the side of our concrete pad and the X-axis to be running along the horizontal axis of our plane here. And that looks like we have it lined up pretty nice. I'm just going to save our project really quick now. So first off, let's go ahead and add in our CG element, which is going to be the basketball. I'm just going to place my cursor around where the ball is on our background image there and go Shift A and add in a UV sphere. This is going to be smoothed a bit more by using a modifier. So I'm clicking on the modifier tab here and adding in a subdivision surface modifier right there. We can leave those settings on default. Now, of course, I'm just going to scale our ball down to match in size approximately with the ball there. And then we want to make sure that the ball is in the right placement in relation to our scene. So if I put it over by myself here in the footage, you can see that I wanted to make sure it's along the X-axis. So if I pull it over there, so it's around the X-axis there, and then I go to camera view, you can see that the scale now can be a bit bigger. So this is just kind of getting the proportions of the ball right in relation to the video footage in the scene. And now all we're going to do is project that texture that we shot on the scene of the location here right onto our UV sphere. So I'm going to start off by splitting our window here and then clicking up here to switch to our UV editor. So go ahead and click open, and we're just going to grab that texture. Again, you can download it with the assets in the description. Here we just have a shot of our ball. Hit the period key on my numpad to jump to a close-up shot of our ball there. And then I'm just going to tab into edit mode by hitting tab and selecting everything and going U, project from view. This gives us a UV sphere projection here. And I'm just going to hit A to select all of these points in our UV editor, and then scale it by hitting S and X, and then scale it by hitting S and Y to fit the shape of our ball. You can then hit G to kind of line it up. And we're just going to make sure that it's fitting it without going too far over the edges. And with that said and done, we can now make a simple material for this ball. I'm going to click on the material tab here, go new material. Under the base color here, we're just going to click that little button there and choose image texture. And this image texture is going to be the one we just opened up. If you click the little drop down there, it's already loaded in, and you can just grab the basketball texture. Now, if we switched to a rendered view here so we can see what it's looking like in our Eevee render engine, you can see that it has a bit of stretching, yes, but it does the job, and from this distance, it will look perfectly fine, just like that. Now I'm going to hit W and hit Shade Smooth, And all we're going to do is add a simple material to this now. So I'm going to switch from our UV editor to our shader editor, hit N to close off our properties tab there, and I'm just going to add a little bit of bump mapping to our basketball. So go Shift A, and we're going to add in a vector bump node. Connect the color to the height of our vector node here, and then the bump goes to the normal on our principled shader. So that gives us a lot of bump, as you can see right there, and we're going to take this down to about a strength of a 0.2. If you wanted to add in a color ramp to kind of tweak this bump a little bit, you could by going Shift A, adding converter, color ramp, dropping it right in there, and then if you bring the black values up, you can have some areas smooth and some areas bumpy, just to kind of control the amount of bump mapping. But I like to make it mostly bump. So now that we have our element, let's start matching the lighting in our scene. So I'm going to grab this spotlight that comes in our default scene, and I'm going to change it over to a sun lamp. Here I'm going to take the strength down to about a strength of 5. And then I'm going to give the color a little bit more of a warmer color to match the sunlight. Just a little bit there. Next, I'm going to change the angle here, which affects the softness of our shadows. I found for this scene, in the amount of overcast that it was, going for about a 4 gives you a nice amount of soft shadow to kind of match the scene. But you're going to want to adjust this if you're shooting in direct sunlight. It's going to have to be a sharper number, more like 1. And if you're shooting in complete overcast conditions, you can make this more of like an 8. For this tutorial though, I'm going to go with a 5. Now before I place my sun, I'm going to open up our environment texture that I shot. So before I close off my shader editor here, I can just switch from object over to world. And here you can see we have our world background here. And if I go ahead over to our world settings right here, choose color, environment texture right there, we can go ahead and open up that environment texture that I shot. So I'm going to go Shift A, and we'll start off by adding an input texture coordinate here. And then Shift A one more time and add in a vector mapping node. This is going to be dropped right in between, and then we're going to have it generated to the vector and then vector to the vector on our texture here. This gives us some controls to rotate our environment around to make it match the footage. So I'm going to rotate around the Z here until we have the playground here about the right place in our scene. And then you can see the rotation also needs to be adjusted along the y-axis here. It won't line up exactly, but something like that will give us the lighting in the general direction of what we're looking for. And now I'm just going to take the strength down to about a 0.35. If you had the hardware to be able to shoot an actual HDR, that would be great, and you could use that purely for your lighting. I don't have that kind of hardware available to me, so I need to use a combination of an environment map with a sunlight. So now I'm going to add in a flat plane on our ground here to add some shadows off of. So I'm going to go Shift S, cursor to world origin, and then Shift A, add in a plane. Now I can close off our shader editor here, and I'm just going to scale up our plane until we have a nice flat surface here that will give us our shadows. Now after adding this, you can see that the rotation of our scene could be tweaked just a little bit. So I'm going to hit Z and go to wireframe, and then just make sure that our camera is rotated down a little bit more. That's looking good. As you can see, the grid floor kind of goes to the horizon nicely now. Okay, so switching to rendered view here now, we're going to use this plane to allow us to set the lighting up in the right position and match the shadows to the floor where the shadows would be cast from our CG element. So I'm going to grab our light and place it over here just so it's towards the right side of our scene. And I'm just going to rotate it by hitting the R key and the Z key to rotate it along the Z axis. Now if you take a look at our footage here, let me just hide our assets here by hitting H. And we can also make our footage 100% opaque in the background there by grabbing our camera and under the background settings just turning the alpha up to 1. You can see that we have a shadow coming almost directly behind the hoop, but it's offset a little bit to the right here as well. And that's what I want to match my shadows with. So if I was to grab this ball and place it near our hoop here, let me just hit Alt H to unhide our items here. I want the shadow to be right around the corner of our screen here where the hoop is. You can see right now our shadow is a little bit low, so that means that I have to rotate my sunlight a little bit more and just to kind of place it in the general area of where the hoop shadow is. And there we have it. Our shadow is now lined up very closely with the shadow on the ground there, which means that we're in the right spot. So we can now delete our cube here. We don't need that for shadow reference anymore, but it does kind of help to see which direction the shadows are going. But we can delete that now by hitting X and delete. And now we want this plane to only be visible for shadows. So over here, I'm going to go to our object settings, scroll down to our visibility settings. Now before we can change these settings, we need to set our render engine to be cycles, as Eevee is nice for kind of previewing what we're doing, but I want it to be rendered in cycles for the most realism. So I'm going to switch to cycles here, and then back to our object settings on the plane here, you can see that we have some extra settings under visibility, one of them being shadow catcher. So we want to check shadow catcher, and this will allow the plane here to only be visible for the shadows that are landing on it, which is exactly what we want. And then you can also see that we're getting some reflections here. That's because we want to go to our render settings here, scroll down, and under film, we're going to change this to be transparent. So now you can see we have a shadow there with nothing else being caught on the plane here. And the last thing we want to do is scroll down to our color management settings here and make sure we change it from filmic to standard, as we don't want to have any color changes on our scene. We want it to match the footage exactly. So change that to standard. And now you can see we have the sun in the right position, but you can see that this is still kind of casting a white light onto our ball here. That's not what we want. So what I can do is I can go to our material settings here, give it a new material, and instead of having it be white, we're just going to give it the color of pavement. You can see we have some color right here. All I need to do is grab our eyedropper here, grab that color right there, and this will allow it to kind of emit the proper light that would be bouncing off of the pavement here and making it match the color nicely on the ball. I did find that the colors didn't match quite exactly though in this scene, so what you can do is split your window here to bring up the shader editor again, and with our ball selected there, I'm just going to hit N to close that off. All you need to do is add in a few simple nodes to tweak the colors to make them match a little bit more. So all I did was add in a color gamma node and give it a little bit more gamma. And then I went Shift A and added in a color RGB curves. This allows us to kind of add some color to it. So as you can see, this ball might be a little bit more red. You would go to the red value here and just increase the amount of red a bit. And then again, maybe a little bit of green just to kind of counteract that amount of red. And then for the blue, you might even want to take this down a little bit, as the ball was a little bit too blue. And that just allows you to kind of match the colors a bit better. And for animating, what we're going to do is we're going to use a curve and have the ball follow along that curve so we know exactly what the path the ball is going to follow, and it will make keyframing super easy. So I'm going to start off by placing my cursor over by our subject here, which is myself throwing the ball, and I'm going to go Shift A and add in a curve, and we're just going to add in a basic path. Here I'm going to tab into edit mode, and we're going to delete 2 of the segments. As you can see, it has 5 segments right now. I'm going to delete the top one by hitting X and delete vertices, and the last one by hitting X and deleting vertices. Now I'm going to grab our curve here and hit G and X to slide along the X axis, and then G and Y to kind of slide it right into the middle of our scene here. Now I want to scale it up. I want to take the first point and I want to put it over where the ball will be thrown, right along that red line that we lined up there, and you can see that it's lined up in 3D space very closely there. And then this point is going to be right at the hoop level, right beyond the hoop, just a little bit there. And then this has to be moved over a little bit to kind of follow a straight line to where the hoop is lined up in relation to our scene. So it might help to hide our shadow catcher for now, so we can kind of see where it is lined up in the grid floor. So there we have our 2 segments in place. Now I'm just going to grab that center segment, hit G, and pull it up until we have a nice curve. So I'm going to use this to kind of match the path that my wild throw, that of course doesn't go anywhere, follows. So I'm just going to make my timeline a little bit bigger here by moving this up. And we can see that the path that this ball follows starts a little bit over more, so I can grab this point, pull it over just a little bit more. And again, I'm pulling it just past it a bit, so I don't need to be right on it, but just past it. And then you're going to follow through your timeline here, and you're going to see the path that this ball makes. Now, it doesn't fly quite far enough, obviously, but we can still see the trajectory of the angle that it flies at. And we want to make sure that our curve is kind of matching that distance at all these points along here. And as you can see, it does. As it kind of hits that point and starts to fall, the distance from the ball to the curve actually looks really good right now. So basically, it's a circle with the point pulled a little bit closer towards the hoop, as the ball kind of has initial velocity and then slows down and falls a little bit more straight down. So something like that looks like it will be a good path. You can maybe make it just a little bit higher if you want it to be a little bit more impressive. All right, so now we're going to take our ball and we're going to go into our modifier settings here. and we're going to add in a new modifier. Add the modifier curve, and then we're going to choose the object to be that path we just added in. Now once you do that, your ball might be placed in a wonky direction over here, and that's just because we have to add the starting point for the ball to be the same point as the curve here. So with the curve selected, I'm going to go Shift S, cursor to selected. And then I'm going to grab our ball there, and I'm going to go Shift S, selection to cursor. And that's just going to snap our ball to be right along the path now. So if I grab our ball and then I grab it along the x-axis, you can see that as I move it, it follows that curve exactly. So now we can do some keyframe animation. So zooming in here on the shot, right here is where I want the first CGI ball to take over. So I'm going to hit G and X to move our ball right to that location and line it up right around where the first frame should be. Maybe just a little bit further than this one as it's traveling a little bit faster. And I'm going to scale it up a little bit as well to match the size right there. That looks pretty good. And now I'm going to hit I and insert a location, rotation, and scaling keyframe. Now I'm just going to scrub along our timeline all the way to the point where we have the hoop animated with our ball that we pieced together at the beginning. And as you can see, our line here doesn't really line up exactly because we moved it a little bit. So I have to grab that last point and move it over just a little bit here so we can line it up. And now I'm just going to grab our basketball, hit G and X to move it along that curve right about where we want it to be, the frame before that takes over. So here I'm going to hit I and insert the keyframes. And as you can see, I want this keyframe actually to be a frame over. So I'm going to grab it right there and just drop it over one more. And there we have it. As you can see, the ball kind of gets distorted by the curve modifier a little bit. This could be fixed with a number of different methods, but the easiest one is just to make your curve a little bit bigger by moving it like that. And this just allows the ball to not be distorted at that point. Of course, we're going to have to line up the keyframe here now to line up with the ball animation. So I just want to pull this keyframe back a bit to be right about there. And you can see that as the ball comes right there, it will take over with that frame right there. Now the scaling might have to be changed a little bit as well. So I'm just going to scale it down a little bit at this point and insert that keyframe again. And as you can see, the ball is looking like a better scale, maybe just a little bit too big still. Scale it down a little bit more, insert that keyframe. Now I do want to just move this last keyframe up until it's hitting at the exact same time that the animation starts on our scene here, which is frame 146. So this ball should really be there at 146. Okay, so that keyframe is set right at the point where that ball appears on the net that we spliced together. So now the path of this is going to be not physically correct because the way Blender handles animation is it kind of gradually moves into the keyframe and then slows down at the end to kind of smooth between keyframes. But this is not what we want. As you can see, the ball starts off slow and then actually slows down at the end. We basically want the opposite of this. So we can fix this by going into the graph editor here, splitting our window, and then choosing the graph editor right there. And I'm going to hide all of the different axes here on our sphere, just leaving the x-axis, as that's where the most of the animation happens. You can see that it's exactly like I said, the curve kind of starts off slow, gets faster, and then slows down again at the end here. And we want the opposite of this. So I'm going to grab this handle and just pull it down a bit, almost towards the middle of our curve here, to give it some initial velocity. So now, as you can see, when I throw the ball, it's going to start off very fast, which is exactly what I'm looking for. Maybe not quite that fast. I can pull it back just a little bit. And then at the end here, we want it to fall very fast. So we're going to pull this handle up a bit. And so this gives us sort of that middle area where the ball slows down a little bit and starts its downward trajectory. And that's going to line up really nicely here. We have a much better looking realistic animation. And if we kind of match it to the video that I shot here of me just whipping the ball, you can see that it actually follows the path of that ball very closely. And that's exactly what we want. So there we have it now. We have the animation, we have the shadows being cast on the surface here, and we have our ball being rendered to match our video. Now before I render a scene, I want to add a little bit of motion blur to it. So I'm going to go to our camera settings here, and I'm going to enable motion blur. The shutter should be taken down quite a bit to about a 0.15 to kind of match the scene shutter that I was shot with. Not too much motion blur as you can see on this ball here, but just a little bit. So I'm going to change it down to about a 0.15 and then hit F12, and we'll see what we're looking like with a render here. All right, we have our render here with our ball with that motion blur added and a very subtle soft shadow that you maybe can see there on the transparent background. So we can open this up in the compositing tab now and add it over our live footage. So here in the compositor tab, you can see we have just a render layer here. If I click use nodes, you can see we have the ball right there. And I'm just gonna add in our movie clip. So I'm gonna go Shift A, add in an input movie clip, and then make that the movie clip right there that we already have imported in our background. And then with a simple color alpha overnode, we can combine the two of these. So the render layer here with our CG ball goes in the bottom socket, and the movie clip goes in the top socket. And if I go to this here, you can see that our visual effects is added over the top here and is matching very nicely with our footage. And the only thing we have to do here now is tell the ball when to be visible and when to be not, because we don't want a CG ball in our scene until it leaves my hand here. So I'm gonna jump to frame 79 here, right when it leaves my hand, as you can see there. And I'm gonna add some keyframes to our alpha overnode here. So at frame 79, I want it to be visible. So I'm just gonna hover my mouse over the factor of the alpha overnode here and hit I, and that'll add a keyframe to that value. And if I go to a frame previous, where I want the real ball in my hands, I'm gonna make this a factor of 0. And hit I again to add in another keyframe. So here, the ball appears only after frame 79 when the ball is leaving my hand. And then we want to do the same thing for when the ball hits the basket. So I'm going to jump to frame 146, and this is the first frame where we have the actual ball in the basket. So we want this to be 0 on our factor, so the ball is not visible, the CG ball that is. And we'll jump one frame previous and make it 1, so it is 100% visible right before it hits the basket. All right, so now our ball will only be visible during its trajectory through the air, and then it will become hidden when it hits the net and become visible when it leaves my hand. So the last aspect to be added to the scene is just taking out that really bad toss that I make right here that doesn't land in the basket. And that is done really easy with some masking. So I'm gonna jump over to the movie clip editor here by clicking right there and going to the movie clip editor at the bottom there. And we're going to open up our footage there, of course, by telling it to use the shot we've been using throughout the whole tutorial here. And all I have to do is track the ball between these two keyframes. So starting at frame 79, I'm going to add in a camera tracker to follow the ball. And everywhere that the ball is, we're going to be masking it out. So to do this, we're going to first change a few tracking settings here. I want to use the preset fast motion. So just click fast motion, and it doesn't seem like anything happens, but it does change your settings. So go ahead and just click fast motion, and then your settings will be changed here. And that is basically the settings that I'm going to use. I will change the motion to be location only, because we don't need any rotation or anything for a mask like this. And then I'm just going to go to frame 79 here, control left click right on the ball there, and we'll add a tracking marker. Now if you're lucky, you'll be able to just track the ball all the way through the footage by clicking this button here and having it track. But the ball is a little hard for the tracker to follow here, so we have to do a little bit of manual keyframing. So I'm just going to be jumping through the keyframes at where it loses its track here using the arrow keys, and then just manually placing the tracker by hitting G and moving it right over the ball. So here I can just then click the track button and it will track it through the rest of the path there. You can see that it does get messed up a little bit at this point, so we need to go ahead and manually adjust it from this point onwards. And there we have it. We just placed the trackers to match everywhere that the ball moved, and from here we can just clear the tracks beyond that point. So we have our path right there where the ball follows, and this all needs to be masked out. So we already have the tracker. Now all we need is the mask. So up here, I'm going to choose tracking and switch it over to mask. And I can just go add right there. And we're going to add in a circle. The circle mask is added over in the corner here. So I'm just going to hit G to bring it over right over our tracker there. We can scale it down a bit smaller as it doesn't need to be as big as it is. And we can add a little bit of feathering to this mask as well by choosing scale feather right there. And then just moving your cursor so you have a little bit of featherness added to that. Now all we have to do is with our mask selected, hit A. The tracker is already selected there, but just make sure it is. And then go Control P. And this will mean that the mask is now parented to the tracker and following everywhere that tracker goes. So everywhere that tracker goes, we have the mask, and that is exactly what we want. Now at this point, you can see we have a little bit of shadows that might have to be removed. As you can see, some shadows showing up right there as it gets closer to the ground. And for this, we're going to add in a second mask. So I'm just going to go add a square this time, and we'll line this up right around where these shadows end up coming in, right around here. Scale it along the X a little bit just so it covers everything you need, and boom, perfect. So I'm going to jump back to our compositing here by clicking up here and switching to the compositor. And here all we have to do is tell Blender to everywhere that we have the mask to use an image of our background here where the ball is not present in the scene. So I've included a still image with the assets below, so you can add that in by going Shift A and adding an image. And this is just a still image of the scene here. If I go Control Shift to show you guys what it looks like, with no ball in the scene. Actually, the ball is over by the hoop there, so it's not in the way of any of our masking. With this right here, all we need to do is go Shift A, add in an input mask right there. We're going to just select that mask that we made right there, and we're going to choose motion blur, and we can give this even less samples. It doesn't need to be that much. And then we're just going to go Shift A, color, mix, and we're going to mix this in the bottom socket with our video clip in the top socket, and the factor is going to be the mask to tell it where to mix it. So now you can see the ball, which was usually present in the sky here, if I recall correctly, is now hidden. So if I go Control Shift and click on our movie clip, you can see that it's right there, but once we add the mask to it with our clip here, it is completely invisible. So just a quick tip for allowing you to hide aspects of the scene like the ball here, so we can have our CG element take over. So there you have it, guys. Now all you have to do is render out your animation, make sure the last frame here is connected to the composite node, and you're going to go ahead and set the start and stop times for however many frames you have in your footage. This could be ended at around 200 frames, so you would set it to 200 frames. And then over in the render settings here, you're just going to choose your output. So go ahead and choose the location where you want the file to be saved. Choose your file format. You could save it out as an image sequence and combine those frames later, or you could just save it as an FFmpeg. Save it out as an MPEG-4 format. That's what I like to use. And if you render your animation now, you will see a result like this. So there is our effect, guys. We did some masking, we added some CG elements, we matched the lighting and added some shadows, and we fooled all of our friends, fingers crossed, in the process. So I hope you guys have had some fun making some sweet trick shots. This is the most realistic way to do it, in my opinion, where you're combining real aspects, like the net being real, where you could have, of course, added the net in CGI, but the more elements that are real, the harder it is to tell if it's fake or not. So you might as well use the net as a real asset because you can, and only do the ball CG as it's flying through the air. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video tutorial series. If you make something cool, go ahead and share it with me, tag me in it if it's on Instagram. And I'd also like to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this tutorial. Hope you guys learned something, impress your friends, and make millions of views on YouTube with your trick shots. That's going to do it for me though. I will see you in a future video tutorial. Bye-bye. Woo!